Okay, thank you very much indeed for joining this session this morning. My name's Anna Round. I'm a Senior Research Fellow at IPPR North. And the purpose of this session is for people to speak to Jamie, Jamie to listen and respond and engage in a dialogue. This is the start of a dialogue with people in the North East. Jamie, do you want to introduce yourself very briefly?
Hi everyone. Yeah, well, I'm the North of Tyne man. I've got a sign to prove it. If any of you are from the Northeast, you're probably sick of seeing me on the telly and in the print and everything. Listening events are great. It means I don't have to prepare a speech, but listening is kind of the core of the approach to the North of Tyne. We co-design our community hubs. We're co-designing our business responses. We have our Citizens Assembly, our Poverty Truth Commission. So yeah, it's all about listening. So with that, I'm going to shut up.
We'll move on to a modern session. So the format of this session is very straightforward. We're going to hear from three people working in fantastic organisations in the northeast of England, and they'll speak for about 5 minutes each. At the end of that, Jamie will respond, and then there'll be an opportunity for people to ask questions to Jamie and to get involved in the discussion. Please could I ask everybody, if you're not speaking, to put your microphone on mute. But please do use the chat function to get involved in the session, and in particular to ask questions prompted by the talks that we hear that you'd like Jamie to respond to. I think Stephanie will keep an eye on the chat so that when you ask questions, those will get Jamie, and that you'll be able to hear response to those and get involved in the discussion. In the very unlikely event that something goes wrong with the Zoom, or that anything happens with responses, the call will end and you'll immediately get a new link emailed to the address that you registered with. So if anything goes wrong, that's what will happen, but hopefully that's very, very unlikely. The session is going to be recorded. So if you don't want to appear on the recording, please turn your video camera off. And if you've got any specific questions about this, please email the People's Powerhouse. So I think that's all of the housekeeping, much less of it if you do these things by Zoom. And I'm going to invite our first speaker to speak for 5 minutes, and that's John Downs from Street Games. John, would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, I hope everybody can hear me, and morning all, and thank you for having me. I've made some notes so I don't go over, and also hopefully I'm homeschooling with my 11-year-old son, so if he walks in like BBC fashion in the midst, I will, hopefully it doesn't in the next few minutes, but you never know, these things can happen. So Street Games, I could go on forever about the work we do. We're a national charity, but we've been based, I look after our work across the northeast, live myself in Northumberland. And as a charity, our focus is on working with children and young people living in the highest areas of poverty and deprivation. And we've been going about 15 years, and in those 15 years, we've always had a lot of work and presence in the North of Tyne area, so within all three areas of Newcastle, North Tyneside and Northumberland. The main thing we try and do is use sport and physical activities to change the lives of young people, and our strapline is to make the lives of young people healthier, safer and more successful. So it brings us into lots of bits of work. More recently, you might have heard about us in Newcastle leading the Best Summer Ever programme for the last 2 years over the summer holidays as part of the Holiday Activity Fund programme. So we do a lot of work around, using sport, physical activity and engagement to tackle some kind of poverty issues around young people. When we look at young people and making their lives more successful, the kind of primary work, one of the kind of underpinning things is about young people shaping what we do. And we're going through a period at the moment of our new strategy around getting young people shaping all levels of work we do. The real challenge for us is our delivery method is supporting local organisations. So we work with about 150 organisations across the northeast to support them to do more for young people living in those areas. So we don't deliver directly. We work with local community organisations, youth organisations, local authorities, try and empower them and help them do more for young people, be it through funding, training, programme development. So that's our kind of way of delivery, is through those young people and helping them do more. And therefore, within that, when we're talking about getting young people shaping everything, it's what we do as a charity and ultimately what those local organisations doing. So our work at the moment, in terms of the decision-making work with young people, is looking at all levels, and we're kind of looking across a spectrum now of looking at empowering young people through them shaping their local sessions that they turn up to, through to employment. So we're looking at the model of getting young people shaping what we do, maybe moving away from the term youth voice and looking at practice of how we listen to engage young people in all levels. So not having a youth board as the only thing, but how do coaches and youth workers shape their activities about the young people who turn up? Because not everybody wants to be involved in formal decision-making ways. You know, we talk about elements of youth volunteering through to youth action, because the steps through to then employability development, and then ultimately where we want to employ those young people from the communities. And over the last 15 years, we've seen that happen, whereby a lot of the partners we work with in the North East, and especially within Newcastle and North Tyne side, have employed young people who've been on that journey through empowering them at their own sessions. They've been young volunteers, they've shaped things, and actually there's a number of young people we've worked with who are now the youth workers, the sports coaches, the leaders of those organisations. So for us, that shaping young people shaping what we do is incredibly important. That leads into the programmes we develop, and therefore, how do we keep that cycle going for us of empowering more organisations and creating multiple ways of decision making for young people? And ultimately, what we're looking at is a kind of culture shift. What we want to embed across our organisation and our partners is a way of a practice around it. It's everybody's responsibility to work who are working with young people and organisations across all levels to get the views of young people. So in one sense, you talk about maybe unheard voices, those who wouldn't normally step forward in formal decision-making process, but those who were the kids turning up to the street game session on the park on a Friday night. We want to hear from those about what their session is like, through to, as a national charity, how we shape ourselves as a national charity. They're all as important voices that we need to gather, and that's about a kind of culture shift and a practice shift that we work on. I think I'm done briefly to cut it in time.
Thank you very much indeed, John. That's extremely interesting. There's a lot of food for thought there. I'm going to move on next to our speaker from Shieldfield Art Works. Gemma, please go ahead.
Can we share our screen because we have a little presentation?
I think you can. If Stephanie, you'll correct me if I'm wrong about that, but I think, yeah, that's wonderful.
Hi, is that working for you now?
Yeah, thanks. Great. Hello, my name is Lydia, and I work at Shieldfield Art Works as Programme Manager.
Hi, I am Gemma. I work as Emerging Artist Coordinator at Shieldfield Art Works also.
So we're an arts organisation based in Shieldfield, Newcastle, and we operate on the intersection of contemporary art, theological reflection and community activism. And as both an art space and a project of the Methodist Church, we're committed to understanding how these three spheres can speak, interact and learn from each other. We believe arts and creativity are integral parts of human life, and with art's unique ability to articulate, to question and to inquire, we can enact positive change in our communities and in the world. And we produce community-oriented art exhibitions, projects and events that explore all areas of life and deal with pertinent local issues within Shieldfield.
So if you don't know Shieldfield, it's located on the edge of Newcastle City Centre, and it's a mix of kind of post-industrial land and council housing. It's also an area which is under intense urban development pressure. We've had a 467% increase in private student housing over the last 5 years, most of which is led by multinational developers who really have little interest in the local area or residents, and that includes both long-term residents and arguably student residents themselves. Shieldfield has a centre of kind of council housing with a really diverse population of elderly people, families, refugees and asylum seekers. And we've really found over our last 10 years of research There's a sense that the community really feels hemmed in and a bit forgotten. There's really been little local community oriented investment, especially considering the massive influx, kind of population influx. And there's really a lack of community facilities and infrastructure. So SOAR has a real long-term commitment to this area, and we've been in Shieldfield for 10 years. We invest in our community and we really try and support the people here. We have developed relationships and ways of working which centre on art and centre on community. We use art as a means of inquiry and of activism to generate debate, give voice to issues often overlooked, and reveal hidden injustice. SOAR is all about amplifying unheard voices. As an arts organisation, sometimes we use a quite arty term for this called social engaged practice, which is simply a fancy way of saying it's art which involves people and communities in debate, collaboration, or social interaction. We know that land development and ownership is a real primary concern for local residents. And ultimately, what SOAR is trying to do is seek positive change for our city. However, I'd like to be really honest about this. We realise that SOAR and on a wider scale, art itself are only part of the solution. We really need support from communities, the mayor, funders and partners to expand our work and expand our impact.
So how do we do this? Well, I'll give you 3 short projects that we have worked on. This was a project called Community Not Commodities, and we sought to explore the emotional value of home and communities in an age when financial value is often placed before community value. And using printmaking, which is a medium often used to express protest, this project featured an exhibition, events, workshops and discussions which asked questions both practical and emotional about housing and community. And it explored this local outrage and gave platform for local voices about the commodification of land. And it asked the question, who even has the right to make these decisions? And as you can see from the screen, we had some large billboard gallery on the outside of our building as a public platform for local voices. And majority of these are quotes from local people. And we also had a wall of resources of other community action projects as an inspiration and empowerment for our local people. And the second project is Shieldfield Wheatfield, which is an urban food growing project with artist Mikey Tompkins and also with local residents, and that began in summer 2019. And after talking with participants and residents after his mapping workshops, the feedback was that there was a curiosity to actually grow some food in Shieldfield. So we collaborated with Mikey and with local residents to grow wheat here, and we harvested threshed meals and baked it into 10 community loaves to share at our Grounded Harvest Festival this past October. And this was a community-led and inspired project. It was activism in action around issues of food security and social isolation, which are things that we've seen in the news are really key issues at the moment. And it upskilled local residents in growing skills. And our final project that I'd like to talk about is our COVID-19 response programme, which was a collaboration between us and a community benefit society called Wellbeing Shieldfield. It was a creative lockdown programme for Shieldfield, where we organised collective drawing, distributed materials for locals to grow in their homes, and we produced cooking videos so that people were upskilled in cooking from what they already had in their cupboards, because a lot of our community members couldn't even get to the shops. And it also explored hidden community voices. And it showed that community and collaboration are absolutely vital in times of crisis, and that creativity can be used to flourish and bring hope into a community.
So Shieldfield is really reflective of the way communities are being kind of left behind amidst a lot of urban development, gentrification, and a general lack of investment in the north. SOAR knows that art works to bring people together as an active way to examine, discuss, debate, and enact change. We know that art can facilitate a more creative approach to imagining and planning the future. And we know that art can amplify voices and speak truth to power in a surprising and non-elitist way. But to expand our impact, we ultimately need to change the balance of power within communities. We need residents, landowners, and councillors to be equal and have decision-making power which is transparent. We need resources, both in people and money, which can kind of match or at least compete with the power of developers potentially. And we need more financial and people-powered support for organisations who are on the ground, committed to the long term and already embedded in communities. Essentially, we are the people's power who are already here, we're already working for the North, and we need support to continue this work. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. That's really interesting, brought together so many important themes. Our final speaker from the organisations in this session is Amy Golding from Curious Monkey. Amy.
Hi everybody. Hi Jamie. My name's Amy Golding. I'm Artistic Director of Curious Monkey. We're a Newcastle-based charity and theatre company for social change. We're also based very close and almost in Shieldfield, actually. We do many things as well as theatre, especially at the moment when all the theatres are closed. So thank you so much for having me to talk a little bit about our work and some of the challenges that people that we work with are currently facing. Curious Monkey is the first arts organisation to be awarded Theatre Company of Sanctuary in the North East. We're part of the City of Sanctuary network. We work to create a welcoming and safe place within our city for people who are fleeing war and persecution and seeking sanctuary in our region. We also work with young people with experience of living in care, as well as people from asylum seeking and refugee backgrounds. These two groups of people have something in common. They're both living within systems, systems that they have little or no choice in or say about how they run. One that is built to offer care and one that is built to be hostile, but both are seriously failing in different ways and create huge challenges for individuals who are living and working within them. There are, of course, many young people who are seeking sanctuary here who also have to navigate both of those processes. The projects that we run are about creating a sense of family. Many of the people we work with are apart from their families. It's a place for creativity, for friendship, for cultural exchange, food and support, and where stories and life experiences can be explored safely through the making of art. As well as it being a way for people to express themselves, our creations, the art that we make, whether that be a play, a piece of theatre, a book, a 360 VR film experience, they're also all forms of activism. We share those on platforms and with people who can influence change through training, conferences, symposiums, campaigns. One of the biggest issues that is affecting many of the people that we work with is poor mental health as a result of trauma. For people seeking asylum, the sheer amount of bureaucracy that they have to face on top of this and not in their native language is really, really difficult. We all know how tiresome and difficult life admin can be and how unmotivating poor mental health is. But then imagine living on £35.75 a week, struggling to find culturally appropriate food in a food bank and having no access to Wi-Fi in your accommodation, all during a pandemic. And for care leavers, finding yourself alone with potentially no family support at the age of 18, navigating benefits for the first time, trying to find work for the first time in a pandemic, with social workers' caseloads being stretched over to capacity due to austerity and cuts to services, with the added pressure now of more young people being taken into care during the pandemic, as families who are struggling have not been able to get the support that they need. You can imagine it's really challenging. When the first lockdown happened in March, it was the day before the show that we'd made. We'd made a play called Here with sanctuary seekers over the last 2 years, and it was about to premiere at Northern Stage and tour the UK. Literally our set and our props and our costume are still sitting in an empty dark theatre because it never opened. But on that day, our first thought was, we need to keep connected. We need to make sure that we can still be a constant in people's lives, that everyone has a way to connect digitally and that everyone has their basic needs covered. So we repurposed our funding to cover mobile Wi-Fi devices. We got hold of laptops, we did Zoom tutorials, we helped to set up and run a food bank delivery with halal and culturally appropriate foods. We developed our creative practice to work online with lots of experimentation. Some theatre works very well online and some really doesn't. We were running dance, drama, yoga, writing, well-being, social sessions, and doing lots of individual checking in with people on phones, in parks, on doorsteps, to make sure that they were not at risk, and had a support network that they could still be part of. I think a common thing for many independent arts organisations who can be flexible and flight of foot and make decisions really quickly is that for some time now, and especially during the pandemic, they've been plugging gaps in services, and it makes sense. You know, trust is built through working long term, very closely on creative projects together. There's a real sense of care in the way that these projects and experiences are designed. So people do come to us for support outside of the creative offer. And it's brilliant. It's brilliant that that trust is there and we help wherever we can, but it's also challenging and it's also problematic. We're not mental health workers, we're artists, and we're not a food bank, but people that we care about are hungry. All of Curious Monkey staff have recently been training in mental health first aid, as it was becoming apparent that signposting to other services is becoming more challenging when waiting lists are long, capacity is stretched, or finding the right support for a care leaver's complex needs when they fall through the gaps after transitioning out of care is very difficult. So I'm going to conclude with a few things, and I'm not sure whether any of these are specific to the North of Tyne. I know these issues are common in many places in this country, but I speak about what I know and what I see within the projects that I work on here in Newcastle and in the surrounding areas. There are inconsistencies across the support from local authorities in the region in how children's services work. Some are doing brilliant work promoting creative means to improve the well-being and life chances of young people in care, and some are seemingly so stretched that they're urged that participation of their young people in creativity is not a priority, as social workers don't have the capacity to engage in it. And this is really worrying, as is the lack of support for care leavers. There's a lack of intervention work with families to prevent the numbers of young people entering care in our region from continuing to increase. And the fact that people who are fleeing war and persecution and suffering trauma, brilliant people who have so much to offer, are banned from working. Some can't access education, and many have long drawn out asylum processes, which mean they're living in limbo for years, unable to contribute when that is all that they want to do. Living in often unsuitable accommodation where during lockdown, non-essential inspections have been carried out without notice from housing provider Mears, when people have been isolating. Their isolation is compounded by the lack of Wi-Fi in asylum seeking accommodation. Most of these are really highly complex problems, but providing Wi-Fi would be a life-changing, quick and easy fix. I was really excited, Jamie, to read about your ideas about adult education and the development of community hubs, which I think are really great priorities. And I really hope that these spaces can be places of sanctuary too, and that there will be some specific support within these schemes for some of the most vulnerable people in our society who I'm talking about today. Thank you very much for listening, and if you'd like to find out any more, do check out our website. The Happiness Project and the Arriving Project are the two that are co-created with people who are asylum seekers and refugees, and Troop is our work with young people with experience of care. I'll stick our web address in the chat, and I'll put my email as well if anyone wants to get in touch. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amy. There's three fantastic presentations about projects that are trying to tackle inequalities, old and new, with COVID-19, about how we can make society more equal, and about how we can also make power more equal and hear a range of voices. Jamie, probably a huge task. You have 5 minutes to respond to both of those talks.
5 minutes, all three. Okay. The first thing, actually, is the one to remember is all of you, one way or another, have been saying, can we have support? The North of Tyne has put money into crowdfunding, Space Hive. So go to North of Tyne, just Google North of Tyne Space Hive and you'll get it. The first funding round's closing, but the next one's opening in just a few months' time. So that's practical help, because I know you all want me to say I support it, but you'd much rather have some cash. Let's be honest about it. And so we have done that, because it's one thing to listen, it's quite another to do something about it. Shieldfield I know very well. I was a councillor in Monument Ward. I would say, Gemma, Lydia, have you spoken to the councillors? Up for election this year, it's a really tight ward, it's marginal. Up for election this year is Alistair Chisholm. So sit down with him and leverage it. That's why our democracy is supposed to work. And you've also got Paula, and you've got Gareth Kane there as well. All of them are actually very good with the community. So, you know, not 100% of councillors are, but they are. The problem with engaging young people, John, is that young people don't stay young. They keep getting older. So every time you get someone who's really keen and wants to proceed, then it depends exactly what we're talking about young people. It's really important, though. You're talking about things like the role in formal decision making. Gemma and Lydia were talking about who has the right to make these decisions about land. Amy was talking about one of the biggest things we can do is recourse to public funds, is to end that for refugees. And I've written directly to the Home Secretary and others asking for that. Why would they listen to me? But the point is, that's what activism is. And it's the nature of activism. And the basis of devolution sort of response to all of this. So what we're trying to do, and I'm not timing this, so please do interrupt, Anna, is that it's got to be, everything's got to be about getting people involved. So the whole approach to everything we've done with our Citizens Assembly, with our Poverty Truth Commission, all of these things are about that. The specific suggestions in there are great, and that's the sort of things that go through the crowdfunder with the support. But art and creativity, and one way or another, you're all actually saying the same thing, is that this is about human creativity. Because to the outside, when we talk about things like develop it gets in, oh, well, that's an economic question. Nobody else is allowed to question it. That's the logic of it. When we talk about local government procedures, well, that's the procedures, and they're written down. That's, you know, and if we start intervening in them, then it's anti-democratic, and it's, you know, it's rubbish. Actually, you can always challenge things, and you can always shift things. When a number of people were encouraging me to run for mayor, I was thinking, do I really want to spend my time in meetings and reading reports? I have to do that. It's a really busy job. But I started reading it, the North of Tyne devolution deal, and I was looking at it and I was thinking, this was written with the assumption this was going to be some sort of swashbuckling business person whose job it was to implement sort of this ideology. And I thought, they haven't seen what would happen if you actually got, and I appreciate People's Powerhouse, non-political, but if you got a socialist in to do the job properly, and to start to use a little bit of creativity, and that's why we're shifting things and being subversive. So the other side of creativity is just that. That's what art is. It is about that we are intelligent in all of the ways that we engage with the world. And that's art and kinesthetics and movement and numbers and literacy and all of these things. And that's what we've got to do. So your individual projects in 5 minutes, I can't do them justice. I can't give you a specific set of answers, not least because the session's called Jamie Driscoll Listens, not Jamie Driscoll Has All the Answers, because I've only just heard what you've said. But do engage with us. I think the engagement officer is on the call as well, who works in my team. So get in touch about the specific things, and we'll include them in the projects, because everything we want to do is about getting communities involved, and not just communities in the place-based sense, communities in the different strata of society sense. And it's got to be about agency and self-development, encouraging people that you can make a difference, because the one thing that we've seen over the last, I don't know, God knows how many years, and it's getting worse all the time, is this belief that government should do things to people and not with people, because government should be people. So the other thing I would say for anyone's listening, if you want to, just stand for office. Choose your party that you align with, and actually there's no point in activism only work. It's all about trying to lobby someone who's in power. Just do what I did and replace them.
Thank you very much, Jamie, and that was perfectly on 5 minutes. So thank you very much indeed for speaking to us this morning and for responding to those really, really interesting talks, and also giving us some very valuable perspectives on political and economic power. We've got some great questions coming through in the chat, so I'm going to take the first couple of questions. Please, if you do have questions, add them to the chat. I'm going to call on people to unmute their microphones and ask their question to Jamie, and then Jamie will respond. So the first question is from Roslyn Calderley. Roslyn, please could you unmute your microphone and ask your question?
Thanks, Anna, and I think thanks, Jamie. I think the crowdfunder idea is brilliant. I've just had a quick look at your website. That's really, really fun. So yeah, I work for Sustrans. We're a charity that helps more people cycle and walk. My question is, how are you getting on with achieving transport powers? I know that government's made it clear there needs to be a devolution for all 7 North East local authorities. If this is achieved, what are your priorities for transport, and would you take on a walking and cycling commissioner?
Thanks. Do you want me to answer these as they come in, Anna?
I'm going to ask, there's a couple of questions in the moment. So the second question at this stage is from Kate Welsh. Kate, please could you unmute your microphone and ask your question?
Thanks very much, Anna. So I'm founder and chief executive of Social Enterprise Acumen. We're actually based slightly south of North of Tyne in Hopeley Spring, but we cover the region. And I set it up some 10 years ago to effectively try to help more people find ways of doing social purpose businesses across the region, and we're a partner of Social Enterprise UK and others, but we're completely self-financing. There is no real structure of support. There's a little bit from the Co-op Hub and 1 or 2 other things, but there is almost no ecosystem of support and recognition for the value of social enterprise, cooperatives, community businesses, enterprising charities. And it's really, I wish you were down here, Jamie, in some ways, because you're not far enough south from me, but for the whole of the region, it would be really great to see something much more structured, and that real recognition of what that does, both in terms of things like community wealth building, but actually really putting something back into the economy, involving people, and finding ways to create more opportunities for people across all of our communities in the region.
Thanks very much, Kate. Jamie, there isn't a third question on this, but there are several comments in the chat about the role of the planning system and planning processes in this. Obviously, I know most people probably talk about that for several hours, but I wonder if you'd like to respond to those 2 questions and also to that issue of planning. If I give you another 5 minutes. Is that okay? Okay,
thanks, Anna, and thanks. Roslyn, Sustrans know it well, and I've had many conversations with Jonah, one of your colleagues. For the benefit of those who perhaps aren't up to speed, the issue is that the North of Tyne is the only metro morality that has no transport powers. The reason for this is it is just north of the Tyne. It's a massive area, it goes all the way up to Berwick. However, the Tyne and Wear transport, the metro system, which is the biggest asset, is half north, half south, so therefore there would be no legal basis for that to come under the jurisdiction of a mayor. So in order that we get these powers, I lobbied government like hell. So in the last budget in March, we made sure it was written in that we would get our share of the money, but it's contingent on devolution across this wider area. Spoke to all of the leaders. I'm finding out that I seem to have some ability as a diplomat, because nobody else was managing to do this, but we've got them all together. We now have agreed that we will come up with a starting point for negotiation with government on the basis of a wider Devo deal. So that would then require a new mayoral election on the new footprint, including County Durham, so from Aycliffe all the way up to Berwick, all the way out to Holtwhistle. So you'll be in that then, Kate. You might get your wish. And I would definitely contest that new mayoral election. With it would come well over 500 million quid for transport. But through the new transport plan, which is out of consultation now, so I'm sure Sustrans, or might be out of consultation very soon. And I'm sure Sustrans will play a big part in getting people to get stuck into it, because I've made sure that it has a net zero target in it, and that it's about multimodal transport. People often get hung up on, well, should we have a motorway or should we have a railway? So, no, we should stop thinking about moving vehicles and start thinking about moving people, because that's what matters. And it's last mile solutions and the ability to get e-bikes onto buses and trains and these sorts of things that are going to make the difference. That's the basis of it. That's what we're going to do. So what can the Cycling Commissioner? I'm not entirely sure, actually, because I don't see them as separate. I see it as transport. The whole lot should come together with the objective of making it a viable option that nobody needs to own a car. I'm not going to say people can't have a car, but you shouldn't need one. And they're really expensive. It costs £4,600 a year to own and run a car. If we get an affordable public transport system, we can just do away with that. Kate, social enterprise. Yeah, absolutely. Everything that we're trying to do. So our community hubs are based on that option. On that approach. COVID has kind of devastated a lot of these organisations because of the austerity, they've had to develop a trading model, and then with COVID, they haven't been able to trade, rent rooms, have their community cafes, and the support very often has fallen through the gaps. We have put money into a lot of money from North of Tyne reserves into VCSE and community sectors to support them. And that's kind of the base of everything we want to do. You'd be pleased to know we're going to get a worker developing for community cooperative and social enterprises to help set them up and make that available. And it is, and I'll make sure it's in every single plan that we put out. So our digital inclusion is going to have things for digital cooperatives, community enterprises, including for example, our teachers cooperative supply agency, which isn't going to be North of Tyne. It's coming from the teachers. So it is the community, it is the workers and the small businesses in these spaces that need the support. So it's not saying the North of Tyne is going to decide this and tell you how to run it. It's going to say we're going to support you. As with everything community based, it needs the community to come forward. Planning. There's massive issues about the imbalance of power here. One of the things that would make more of a difference than everything else would be if planning departments could actually charge the real cost of the work they did, because then they would be able to employ the staff to look at these things. You know, something like the legal term, the equality of arms, that when you have loads of lawyers and various other people, because this is going to be a massively profitable investment, but the council have to charge the standard fee for someone who's deliberately bombarding them with things to try and just bully their way through something. And you know what, all the developers actually that I've spoken to about this, they said they would support it because it means the process would be quicker and things would happen. So that's one of the things. Sadly, the government's new planning white paper is not fit for purpose, in my opinion, the way it handles the infrastructure contributions and things like that. I've made these representations directly in conversations with the Secretary of State, and you can imagine that he had other ideas, but I left him in no doubt about the approach we've got to take. That will require national government legislation. It's beyond the power of the mayor to do anything about
that. We've got I think one question and a related point which I'm going to ask someone to speak to. Anne Staines, your question about digital, I think follows on from some of what Jamie's just said. Anne, could you please unmute and ask your question?
Hello, thank you. Yes, I'm Anne Staines. I work for Workers' Educational Association, and we're very pleased to hear recently about the flexibility that the adult education budget is taking towards provision to make sure that our most disadvantaged residents have access to services in the future as well as during this very difficult year. But what I'd like to ask is, what kind of strategy does the mayoral authority have around the digital divide? Because we're finding that it's a massive gap for our most disadvantaged residents who don't have the money for big Wi-Fi. They quite often don't have the kit, or they may not have the skills in order to engage digitally with some services that are able to stay open. I think there is a small pot of money which I know, you know, is great, it's there, but it's not quite enough to cover the costs there for participants in adult education and other services. And I wonder, you know, is there things we can do to support with developing that strategy or lobbying government? I know, because I think free Wi-Fi is something that other parties have looked at as a right, because it does empower everybody to access services that are cheaper in the long run quite often than having to always do things in person.
Thank you very much, Anne. There's also, I think, a really interesting point for discussion in the chat from Joe Forster, which relates to what Anne's just talked about, but ranges a bit further in some of the issues we heard about in the talks. Joe, are you okay to unmute and speak about the points that you made, or Joe Forster? Joe, I think you're still on mute.
Okay.
Perfect.
Can you hear me now?
Perfect, yeah.
Can you hear me now? Yeah.
Yes.
I was just really trying to say that, well, like Anne has actually said about the digital divide. We have banks of computers in community centres, but they're not accessible. And what we're actually finding is that obviously, the amount of online learning that's required to sustain people online, people can't afford the devices or the IT or the internet access or even the data. And often people would go to cafes or pubs, and they would perhaps even use their mobile phone to get the information they're required. But also the cafes and the pubs are closed now, and the shops where they actually used to link into to get a data connection, because they can't afford the data. But I think it's wonderful to see the arts projects and the delivery of learning that's making such a difference to people's lives, especially with the rise of social inequality that we've always had in this region, regardless, since the industrialization and even more so since austerity. But we've got this, it's rising even higher, and it's so wonderful to see the workers working at such a local level to keep engaging people. But the other important point I would actually like to make is about social purpose and democratic education, and particularly democratic education that I think is critical at this time, because it educates people about democracy. And our citizens need to become critical thinkers if they're to actually work in our communities at a local level to bring about social change. They need education to actually do this, and not miseducation like what we've actually seen in America with this massive divide. So the importance, I think, of popular education that brings people together collectively at a local level to look at the issues that matter to them at a local level and do it in an educational model is so important to actually, if you want social change brought about at local level or even regional level. But it doesn't, it takes a long time to do, and it just doesn't happen automatically. It has to have a structure. And when people talk about social change, we go about it, but it needs structure and it needs funding. That's all I would like to say.
Thank you very much indeed, Joe. Because those are two quite chunky points and questions. Jamie, I'm going to ask you to respond just the two that we've heard now. And again, I'll time you for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Anne. I'll try and be quick so I can get more questions in. Yeah, Anne. I mean, I love what the WA does and what it's been doing its whole time. I think you hit on something absolutely right there. The issue is one of resources, it's quite often, it's interesting that you become mayor and then you realise all the things that you don't have any power over, and how little money you have, and how much of it's already committed. So, when you buy a house,
Sorry, that's terrible chewing. That's great. Thank you very much indeed. Really, really interesting points, particularly about education. The next question we have is from Johnny Douglas. Johnny, please could I ask you to unmute your microphone and ask your question?
Thanks, Anna. Hey, Jamie. Completely agree about the need for the government to do things with people and not to them, and believe the only way that we can really do that is by making things better, is by creating the conditions for those things to happen rather than actually trying to force stuff on people. So you spoke about a crowdfunder you started, and I wondered whether you'd be willing to work with us and our Northeast lab to get a basic income micropilot going, so that we can look at how it might help and support people and lay the foundations for some bigger scale trials, so that we can work on how we create the conditions to help everybody regardless of what they want to do.
Jamie, do you want to respond to that now?
Yeah, thanks, Emma. Thanks, Johnny. I don't know if you know, presumably if you're working with UBI Lab, you know Erin from Kirklees. So I've spoken on platforms with Erin, with Matthew from Newcastle Uni, other people like that about UBI. One of the issues about UBI is, and I know that there's other ideas about, for example, micropilots, but it's one of these things that requires a network effect for it to be genuinely effective. So that if you, unless you get sufficient scale on it, you don't see the real benefits coming through. And this is where you get that debate amongst, for example, often many trade unionists say that, well, wouldn't we be better off with a job guarantee rather than the UBI? And then you get various right-wing think tank types saying, oh, this is great because it means we don't have to have a benefit system. And by the way, we can charge everyone for their GP appointments and all this sort of stuff because you've already got a basic income. So in terms of UBI, I think it's very, very valuable debate to have because we have to engage everybody because it's the questions it raises and what UBI is there to tackle that change it. The nature of asset ownership being what our modern economy is based on, inflating asset prices. If you own a property, if you own a large private pension fund, you're all right. Otherwise, you're going to struggle. And these are the things that UBI would address. Do we have any money for it? We just don't for that sort of scale. But would I be very happy to take part in promoting this as a debate, as the ideas, as getting us to think differently about the nature of our economy? Absolutely right with you.
Thank you very much indeed, Jamie. I think this is the point which, if anybody has any final questions, please could you put them in the chat round about now. Yes, another question from Kate Welsh. Kate, would you like to ask?
Yeah, so we've actually been involved as one of the providers in a government programme to help spin out some local authorities and other public sector bodies, and there have been almost none from the North East. And that feels very disappointing because it's an opportunity very often for parts of public bodies to form a mutual organisation of some sort with an enterprising mindset as a way of being able to actually give power to the people within those organisations to make a real difference in their communities. So I'm just interested in what the view might be from you, Jamie, on that.
Yeah, the support infrastructure for all kinds of local democratic models of economy has really withered over the last couple of decades. The support isn't there. So that's one of the things that we're already working on. In fact, it should be in place within the next few months. So by all means, if you get in touch with enquiries at North of Tyne, the team will put you in touch with the officers working on it. So we've also been working with a collaboration from CLES, Centre for Local Economic Strategies. I think Neil's introducing a panel soon, know Neil well. Co-ops UK, NEF, New Economics Foundation, about actually a deep dive into how we restructure it, because the benefits are quite clear. The fine work of preparing the ground for this takes time, it takes energy, it takes people, if we're going to see it happen at scale, exactly as you say, Kate. And that's really what's needed. So the idea's right behind, it's the putting it into practice phase, and that's where we're working with them to get some detailed policy support of how we're doing it. But we're already doing a lot of stuff in this space. It's just, like I say, we're underpowered. We're trying to dig a trench and we've got a teaspoon. So that's why I'm trying to get more Devo, more powers. And incidentally, a lot of the powers we're asking for are like a regional wealth fund, the power to borrow at base rate, so we can invest in economies and businesses that have pay good work, that have high environmental standards, that have high ethical standards. Why I'm asking for the power to implement a land value charge, so that when the state puts something in, like a new railway line, property prices shoot up, well, we can put a charge on that to fund what we've just built in the first place. And why we're looking at models of invest to save, to change the way that public services are thought of, so that the accounting system allows us to invest up front on prevention in so many places. And that's a massive political task, and we're on it. But unless we get these kind of radical changes, we'll be forever the labour of Sisyphus. We're pushing the boulder up the top of the hill, and then as soon as the funding's cut, it'll roll back down again.
Thank you very much indeed. Some really exciting ideas there for how devolution can move forward and actually be a way of doing things very differently. We've got a further question, which might be our last question, might not. This is from Joe Force. This is about community adult education, which has been hit hard by COVID-19. And some would argue by cuts before that as well. Joe, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yes. Basically, schools, further education and higher education have been reinstated, but it's community adult education that's been fragmented by COVID-19 and suffered a demise and needs to be rebuilt. How would the North of Tyne Mayor help to contribute in helping providers to rebuild what has actually been lost?
Yeah, I mean, as far as COVID goes, you're absolutely right. It's been massively disrupting to so many things. And the less infrastructure an organisation has, the harder it is to bounce back quickly. That's the sad reality of it. In terms of the adult education, that's now been devolved to the North of Tyne, and we got that live on the 1st of August, so just a few months ago, middle of a global pandemic. And the first task was, when the government throws you something massive and shouts catch, the first thing you do is you make sure you don't drop it. So a lot of it has been to make sure there's continuity in there. With that said, we've put a full third of it out for various kinds of approaches, and whenever we've got additional things, we've gone to a really tailored approach. So community adult education is one of those things, is to keep an eye out when we are doing that. The team are very good. They share my approach of trying to build a web, an ecosystem of talking to people to make sure they're involved. I'm sure if you talk to Anne from the WEA, she'd be happy to share the conversations that WEA have had with my team on this, and make sure that this is a big part of what we're doing. Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed, Jamie. We've got about 4 minutes left of the session. So I'm going to invite Jamie, if he has any final comments he'd like to make to wrap up, to do that in 2 minutes. I will time you.
What I would say is, it's really encouraging when I come on calls like this and many others, because you know, I stood for election on the basis that if we actually look at the power of our citizens, and we stop seeing this divide between, you know, state and business, and then it sort of forgets the people in the middle of it, that we are not economic units. Yes, we need businesses to make a profit. We need all organisations to be financially sustainable, or they can't survive, including the North of Tyne Combined Authority, which I can't promise money we haven't got. But it's about unleashing that power of people and recognising that life is about more than GVA, it's about more than asset prices, and the next wave of devolution, I'm wanting to make sure is embedded in it a proper balanced scorecard that's looking at well-being, that's looking at health, that's looking at healthy life expectancy, that's looking at things like diversity and equality, and the work we're already doing with the EHRC is leading the way for combined authorities. And you know what I really want is more money in my comms team, so that I can tell everybody about all the great work we're doing and encouraging you, and making you all feel, you know, empowered to continue all the great work you're doing. So thank you, keep it up.
Thank you very much indeed, Jamie. That's a really great answer. I would say some of those are things that chime very strongly with things that we're working on at IPPR North and some of our visions of devolution. So lots of reports that look at some of those ideas. So thank you very much indeed to everybody for coming to this session today. Huge thanks to our great speakers, John Downs from Street Games, colleagues from Shieldfield Art Works, and Amy from Curious Monkey. Enormous thanks to Jamie for responding to such interesting questions, and Steph for stopping me from messing up all the technology. Thank you to everybody who's contributed to the session. I think it's a really good example of how hearing diverse voices can get a really interesting conversation going, and can raise interesting ideas, and move on to the next stage. People's Powerhouse have set up a day which is really about this kind of conversation. It would be great to keep this going. It would be great to keep this going with our Northern mayors, who I think are in still these really early stages of devolution, and increasingly looking at things, how things can be different in the north of England, and how that difference can include much greater engagement. I'm going to pass over to Steph from People's Powerhouse now, who will tell people how to move on to the next session. But thanks very much indeed to everybody who's made this one so interesting and fruitful.